comics coming out, you got to sell old comics. So how do you sell them? You sell them online. You can't sell them in person too much, not a lot of browsers. So we're going to talk about strategies, and we're going to talk about a kind of a controversial thing, the Key Collector app, a new type of online digital price guide for the new millennium. So let me introduce our panelists today. Man, I've got a power-packed panel full of experience in the comic book industry. First, from Texas, Titan Comics, Jeremy Shorr, welcome back to the show.
Howdy. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being a part of this. Mike Hansen.
Hello.
Freelancer extraordinaire. Welcome back to the show. Thanks for participating.
Thanks for having me.
Cliff Biggers, longtime retailer, comics journalist, just knowledgeable feller about funny books. Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me back.
Welcome back. And then new to the show, first-time member, Adam Freeman. Adam is a former retailer and a current, what is he? He's a consultant to comics in the market. He helps publishers, he helps retailers, and he happens to have the Key Collector app as a client. He's here to speak on their behalf to some degree. So welcome, Adam. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Dan. And may I say, I'm so glad that I shaved my head for this crew because it's obvious I fit right in. I feel like,
man.
Mike, I can see underneath that hat, man.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm going to work on some more hirsute panel members for future episodes. But let's start it off. Let's talk comics, guys. We'll get into the Key Collector app very soon. I want to start off, though, with, okay, in this age, can't sell new product. You got a lot of products in your stores, I'm sure. So there's still the possibility to sell that. And if you weren't already selling online, you might be thinking about it now. There's a lot of channels. I want to ask the retailers in particular. Let me start with Cliff. What do you do in the way of online sales in any way in your store?
We do some online sales for recent hot issues, some variants, that sort of thing, but not a great deal. Particularly most of the back issues, we prefer to sell in store, even though we're not selling very many in store right now. We have a good clientele. I prefer selling books in person. You minimize that mix up where someone claims that they thought the book was in better condition than it was. If you can sell it in person, they get to see that book. And I'm one of those old-time comics guys who likes to know the comics are going to a good home. I'm much more likely to make a deal with a guy who shows true love for the book and comes into the store, and I can tell this is a series he knows something about. That it's that connection. I love comics. I love customers who love comics.
So combination, though, of older stuff. Do you sell older stuff like on eBay or any kind of online stores that? Your old back stuff is in the store.
Entirely in the store, and we have particularly for key issues and for nice Silver Age stuff, we have a remarkably quick turnaround because we have a loyal clientele that's looking for that stuff all the time, and we let them know when something comes in. And very often for a hotter book, a 24 to 48 hour turnaround becomes fairly normal.
And you live in a major metropolitan area, and where comics are fairly strong, I would think. So, like, you've got enough of a local market for back issues that's a profitable way for you to do business, I'm assuming.
Very much so, and we've seen real growth in the back issue market over the past several years. There was a time 10 to 15 years ago where many stores thought the back issue was going to become so insignificant it should not even be a part of the business. You weren't alone in that, Dan. Many people believed that. And we minimized our back issues at that time. We didn't get rid of them. We minimized them because they weren't paying for floor space. But in recent years, starting about 5 years ago, we started seeing a real growth in that market, and we've seen a pretty steady growth.
Yeah, I was dead wrong about that. But for different reasons. We'll get into that. Jeremy Shorr, tell me, what's the market like in the Texas? You're in Dallas.
That's correct. I'm in Dallas. In Dallas, for older comics, there's really only about 2 stores in the whole DFW area that do specialize in back issues. Myself and another store on the south side of town, Duncanville Bookstore. There's a lot of stores that'll have like 5 8, 12 long boxes of comics, but they tend to be relatively newer. They don't delve too much into the older stuff, and really don't want to. It's not a market that they feel comfortable dealing in. It's as I think Cliff will confirm. If you don't have the ability to speak with some degree of effectiveness and knowledge about the stories they're interested in, the artists, the characters, all of that combined together into that one thing where they have that you're able to impart to the customer that you have the experience in what they're looking to either buy, and you can either empathize with them or suggest other things that they might be interested in. A lot of times you'll lose a sale, and a lot of other retailers tell me this. Well, I had the books, but the guy was asking me questions that I didn't have any answers to. So, and unfortunately, one of the things about the back issue market is that there's really only one way to get that knowledge, and that's to read them and sell them. And if you're not doing that, it's really a foreign language. It really is.
I think you just nailed it in the sense that one of the problems I think that many newer store owners like myself stayed away from it's a lot of work, and it requires a ton of specialized knowledge, not just about the comics, but about grading, about, just because the guide says a price, what is the actual street price on that? And I really want to get into that as our next topic. But first, let me go to Mike. Mike, man, when I would go into Eureka Books, I saw you guys were doing back issues. You bought comics from me. I sold you a bunch. You didn't pay me too much for them, but I saw some of them out there as sets. I saw some individual back issues out there, as well as used and new graphic novels. So tell me a little bit about the back issue action, and did they sell?
Yes and no. What tended to happen first of all, Eureka Books, they sell new and secondhand stuff, mostly secondhand. So in terms of comics, it made no sense to have a diamond account. So I was strictly back issues for single issues, and then new and used graphic novels. Mostly used. But for the single issues, the back issues, they sold, but most of them sold to a small handful of collectors. So that was the trick, really, was anytime a comics customer like you came in, the only thing I could do would be to get to know the customer, get to know their interests, and then, like Cliff said, recommend stuff to them based on what they said. And like Jeremy was saying, it requires a lot of knowledge that really doesn't occur in any other retail space. The kind of stuff you need to understand in order to sell back issues. I mean, there's millions of them at this point, and there's hundreds more every single month. So being able to not only be aware of the general market, but keeping up with all of the trends, it's a job for anyone. But unless you have a team of people, like if you're a big enough retailer, you can afford to have employees, trying to do it just one person, like I was as the comics guy at a bookstore, it's a challenge. So I'm actually grateful that we did not have new single issues, because that's just an entire other space to keep track of.
Well, let me tell you this. When you go in that bookstore, it's very obvious that they got somebody there who knows comics, because the section is much different than you see in your typical used bookstore's comic book section, and I give you a lot of credit for that.
Thanks, I appreciate that.
Hey, Adam.
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about online. One of your other recent gigs was working with a certain Stu Colson on a certain Comics Hub project, and he's made a lot of news lately. I don't want to get into the controversy of that proposed plan, but what I would like to talk about is that a back issue selling sales channel? Like, I don't know much about the Comics Hub, but are users of that able to put their back issues up and sell them through that?
Yes. I'm not really involved in the day-to-day anymore, so I can't speak to its current, but I can tell you that I signed up a whole lot of retailers on that system, and they were able to both sell any product that they have in the Comic Hub network has like a database. And so if you scan an item in as it being in an inventory and it was already in the database, it would list it, and you could list that for sale. If, however, you had, say, a copy of Hulk 181 in your inventory, well, nobody's going to list that as just scanning it in because it's a condition issue.
Yeah,
so you could create a sub database like of your inventory that's unique to your store, and list that as well.
Got it. Okay. So what about just in your experience as a retailer? Were you doing, I think you were more the bookstore model. You were one of my generation of retailers, kind of, right?
I was in your generation of retailers. Yeah, I ran that store. Well, I ran it for about 15 years. I really owned it and operated it from about 2000 to 2008, 9, and officially left around 2010. And during that time, I was the same way. I mean, we would focus on graphic novels. We focused on new product. We focused on. We were social media like focused early on in social media. But I did start noticing I could control my margins better by buying collections and selling them. Even if it was selling, we did crazy things to move back issues when we had too many. Like we would do, buy the pound sales, where you could buy your weight in comics for $300 or whatever it was. Big publicity kind of stunty kind of stuff. But we'd also get an opportunity to sell really high end back issues. But like the guys said, it does take a lot of ingrained knowledge, right? And it takes a lot of building that up. And that is not always available to a shop owner who's also doing the books and doing the scheduling and do all of that. So I would say that if I had things like the Key Collector app at that time, I might have put Jeremy on
DA, never.
So I can see using that in the same way I use price guides then, right?
Right. So Jeremy, we'll back in a second. So great segue, because that's my next question. So one of those, the bit of specialized knowledge that some would view as key to like succeeding in that issue is knowing what is a valuable book, what is not a valuable book, right? And all the way up until, well, let's say at least until the end of the last century and into this century, there was really one way that most people checked, and that was the Overstreet price guide.
Sure.
Right. This is an annual price guide put out by Bob Overstreet for the last 50 years or so, and gets input from retailers and other sources. I don't really know, but I have the feeling that Cliff knows a little bit about this. Cliff, what can you tell me, if anything, about the price discovery mechanism of Overstreet?
Bob Overstreet and J.C. Vaughn and other people who continue to work on that have built an elaborate and far-reaching network of retailers who work as advisors for them. And the essence of how the price guide works is the exact element of it that most fans do not understand. Most fans assume the price guide is telling us as retailers, this is what you are supposed to charge for the next year. If that were the case, the prices would have never gone up, because the price guide is, as it explains in the guide, a summary of what retailers were charging in the months leading up to the preparation of the guide. If books went up in price, then someone had to be charging more than the previous year's guide, or else the books would have stayed the same price. Many people will say, I've had people tell me, you can't raise the price above guide, that's illegal. No, it's not. That's the way the guide works. The guide can only increase if someone raised that price above guide. So every book that increases in value between guide 48 and guide 49, someone sold it for higher than guide price.
Okay.
And that's the essence of it. And that advice comes from that far-reaching group of retailers who are reporting their sales on thousands and thousands of books.
Are you, or have you been an Overstreet advisor?
I have not been an Overstreet advisor. Back when Maggie Thompson, and then later just Maggie Thompson, were doing a price guide for Comics Buyer's Guide, I was an advisor for them, but not for Bob Overstreet.
Yeah. There have been other attempts, right? Wizard Magazine even, and other comics.
Right. And Wizard did a great job with it in one regard. they were giving you information more than once a year. The only problem was there were many people who felt that Wizard was manipulating that guide, that there were certain books that were increasing in value far higher than anyone could find sales to support.
Right. Well, so here's kind of a legal question. Anybody, I'm going to open this up to anyone on the panel. Like, there are laws against price fixing, right? I, as a retailer, am not supposed to, if I were still a retailer, I'm not supposed to call up my fellow retailer and say, what are you charging for this? Right? That's illegal.
That is correct.
That is correct.
That is a federal offense. So how is the Overstreet price guide not a gigantic illegal conspiracy?
But because it does not say, here is what I am charging for this. It is saying, here is what this sold for on average in the past year. This is reporting history, not reporting current events. And history, reporting what something has closed for, is in no way a violation because there is no price fixing. Now, if every retailer said, I'm only going to charge what the guide, we're all agreeing we're just going to charge what the guide says and that's it, that would be price fixing, which is why I say the guide can never be an indication of what current price is. It can only be an indication of what price was at this point in history when the guide was put together, and it's an average. Some people charge more than that, some charge less than that. Retailers use that as an evaluation tool, but not necessarily a guide as to what they're going to sell the book for.
Okay. Jeremy, so you sell back issues, you're into it, you know it. Overstreet, yep. I'm assuming, is one of many sources of your pricing info?
Correct.
Explain to me your process when you just try to decide, or whoever decides, what a comic sells for in your store. How does the guide factor in, and what else factors in?
Well, for me, I spend a lot of time paying attention to what, for lack of a better term, what's out there on the grapevine. That is, I don't look at key apps as such. I could, but I do a lot of listening to what my customers are talking about. When people say to me, I'm looking for Pajama Man issue 9. Okay, how come? Oh, it's got the first appearance of Dastardly Dude, whatever it might be. And I'm like, okay, no one's ever asked me for that before, but sure, here it is. And if 3 people in a week start asking me for it, that means I should do some research and see what's going on with that book. But at the same time, if no one's asking me for it and somebody comes in and goes, oh my God, you've got this. Cliff can tell you that happens all the time with books that have been sitting in our bins for 15 years. And I'm like, you could have called me. I would have shipped it to you.
Right.
But again, when the time comes and I know that there's increased demand for whatever issue it might be, and it's been demonstrated by customers coming in and asking me for it, and it being, oh dear, hang on a second. There we go. Sorry. I just had an online sale, and I wanted to make sure that was not an important phone call.
No problem, buddy.
So if I see in store increased demand and interest and traffic for that particular issue, I'll mark it up.
You work the counter at your store?
I do. I run the register almost every day.
Right. Okay. So word of mouth, word on the street, what people are actually buzzing and talking about is super important for you to try to prognosticate what are people going to want a month from now, a year from now, whatever.
But that's how I stay in business. Yes, sir.
Okay, great. Mike Hansen, I saw a lot of prices on back issues and stuff there. Your stuff looked graded. What were you using to do your pricing at Eureka Books?
Well, I'm a really strict grader.
Hang on.
Bye, Jeremy. So
I'm not going to apologize for a guy selling books in this moment.
Right.
Good for him.
I'm not kidding me.
Yeah, no kidding. I can watch that all day.
One thing that you would have seen, Dan, at Eureka Books is that the space for back issues was incredibly limited. So I had way more back issues that were not on the floor than were on the floor. So I was in a constant battle figuring out what the customer base is looking for and making sure there's a little bit of everything that might appeal to different, people that come in. But for pricing and grading, if it was something that I was familiar with, or I knew it was hot, then be pretty easy to price. But for some stuff, and because we're in such a limited rural area, an isolated region, the two places I looked the most were the Lone Star website, mycomicshop.com. They tend to be pretty conservative with their prices.
I agree.
Anti-mile high, if you will. And I would try to price it a little bit below that if it was something that I didn't have a lot of confidence in or didn't know a lot about, but it looked like something that I figured I could sell. Then I just kind of use that as a guideline for just common, reasonably priced comics. For the higher end stuff, if it was something I was going to throw online, if I was pricing it at say $10 and up, then I would look at recent eBay sold prices in various grades. And that tended to give me a lot more accurate information as far as potentially what it could sell for to a global audience than looking at, a monthly price guide or an annual Overstreet price guide. I don't know if you guys have noticed, but there's in a general bookstore, I've noticed that a lot of hobby price guides are not even annual anymore, that they seem to be going in the way of the dodo in the internet age, as people look for other sources of information and other comprehensive databases on a particular subject.
Oh, yeah.
So if you're looking for like a recent stamp collecting book, you might be going back 2-3 years and you might have to pay $30 or $50 for the book because it's out of print.
Right. And then the info in there is that much more out of date. And the more out of date it is, the more room there is for grift by the unscrupulous retailer who knows what's really hot, but they've got this old price guide that says this, that before that anybody realized that this stamp was misprinted or whatever. Same holds true for comics, dude. There's comics retailers that'll whip out a 10-year-old copy of the Overstreet for people and show what the I'm not nobody I would ever invite on this show would, but I know it happens.
Wow.
All of this was very interesting. Wait a minute, we're all teed up here now. Adam, there's like a thing is sitting right in front of you because, man, these guys just outlined a bunch of different price discovery mechanisms from word of mouth to checking eBay sales to checking online sales.
And that is what we've always relied. Right. We have always relied on information aggregators. We've always looked to these sources to give us this information and to collect it into some form that we can use and process quickly. That's what the Key Collector app is. It really began, you mentioned earlier, how do you find the books that are worthwhile? It began as listing those books that are worthwhile. I love this, that Batman Death in the Family is where you settled, because that was the book that got me interested in collecting specifically. I enjoyed reading comics before then, but I was into collecting because of Death in the Family. Anyway, I say all of this to say that these aggregators have always been, you've listed them off, right? We've used Overstreet, we've used Wizard, we've used all of these to do business and to, kind of get that information so that we can have an honest conversation about this value. This is what Key Collector is offering. It's offering in that information in a quick and easy form to process and an up-to-date information. I mean, you could scroll through 1,000 eBay listings to find the information you're looking for, or you can pull up Key Collector and find it quickly. Do a quick search. There's also go ahead.
I'm sorry. The focus on key issues I found really interesting. Some people, when I first had this described to me, it was described as an Overstreet price guide where you could push sort by the price column, right? And so that expensive issues float to the top. And it's signaling out not just like prices for runs of generic comics, but it's focusing on key issues. Yeah. And before this existed, the term key collector, that is a very widely used term. There's a lot of key collectors in the industry, right? So
there sure are.
So I just want to say that we have yet to hear any opinion. You've just explained to us kind of what the Key Collector app does a little bit,
Sure.
One of the things that's interesting is that in this age of the internet and removing middlemen and price discovery and things happening faster, I believe that this key collector app is sort of like the evolution of what all these guys were just talking about, sort of combined into a single digital format. And that could be scary, but it could be very interesting as well. It's controversial because, you get this thing for free. But if you subscribe, if you pay $2 a month, right, you get some subscriber benefits. Mm-hmm. And in these subscriber benefits, you'll see it on the app, I guess, but not the website. Among the benefits, something they call the spec deck and other things that are talking about issues that are popping right this week, that are coming out, that are hot, that are all ready to flip on eBay for 20, 40, $50, whatever.
Right.
And retailers say people rush into their stores on Wednesday morning, grab every single copy of that, and that hurts their business because their regular customers who are used to stuff on the shelves can't get it. So I want to go. That's what I hear. I want to hear first. I want to hear from these other retailers. I want to start with Mike Hansen. Mike, what's your take on that?
I did have a couple of customers that use the app, a couple of my regulars, the bigger spenders. So, it is the sort of thing where people are definitely using it as a resource and as a kind of selective database for the kinds of stuff they want. And I really saw it being used for two main purposes in my store. One was to look for stuff to fill holes in their collection that they want to see what it's going for, and they could use that to kind of figure out, if they're getting a deal. The other thing I saw it for were for the people I'd call the flippers. The people who, Alex, stop it. You're too nice. The flippers tended to look for a deal for the purpose of reselling it quickly, like it's like people who are stock traders.
Yeah, quick flip, day trader.
A quick flip. Now I know that my dad's a stockbroker, so I have a certain knowledge in that, not a lot, but I know that it's the long term in the market that matters the most for people who are investing in anything really. So if you look at how key comics have done versus the stock market, in the long term, they've done fantastic. In the short term, it's a lot more of a crapshoot. Something could be hot for a week and then it gets reprinted and no one cares anymore because it's a comic story and people got it to read it.
A lot of volatility in that market, much like our own stock market these days.
Exactly. So it really depends on what people are looking for, because it could be something like a Batman Damned #1, where even though there's a hardcover out now, people still want that issue because it has historical significance. And
First appearance of the Bat Pole.
Yeah, and it's the only way you can see the Bat Pole.
The Bat Wang. Come on.
Yeah, the Battle Wang is not in the hardcover, so yeah.
Right. So you're hearing it on the street. So Jeremy, where are you? What effects of the Key Comics app, if any, do you see in store? Positive, negative? What's your take?
Well, I've had the answer is I have a stampede of people coming in every week. When I have comics, of course, which we don't right now, looking for those books that they think are going to be awesome and turn around and cool. I've had I don't know that it's not stated because the people who come in and talk to me all the time know about it, but it's not published anywhere. I don't have an official thing. 2. That's what you can do. 2. I'll sell you 2 unless I have it posted on the rack, limit 1 per customer, in which case it's limit 1 per customer. Key collector.
So 2 is your standing policy for comics.
Pretty well, not 100% of the time. There's certain, like, I don't know, when X-Men 1, the most recent launch, if you wanted 5 of those, go for it. But they offered a deep discount, kind of stuff. But there's always exceptions. But generally speaking, I've had a limit 2 for, I don't know, 15, 20 years. Sure. And the 99% of my regulars know that. I almost never have to fight anybody over the limit 2. Every now and then I'll have to fight somebody over the limit 1, but that's fine. I can fight that fight. That's my methodology for controlling it. And I think what that gets me, honestly, I think it gets me more of the people looking to flip just because they know at 2:00 in the afternoon on the first day of release, when everybody else is sold out, I'll still have a copy.
Right.
Usually, not always, but many times.
But so that is a sales advantage in the image of your store and people thinking of you first and going there to get those books. So, Cliff Biggers, Key Comics, what's your take?
Well, first, let me say that about a year ago, I had a very insightful and very enjoyable hour-and-a-half long conversation with Nick, the founder, the owner of Key Collector. I found him to be a guy who loves comics the same way I do, very passionate about what he does, and I think his intentions are remarkably good, trying to give people information. Part of the problem boils down to something my accountant said long ago, talking about speculators. Said, so let me get this straight. They want to buy from you at retail and then make money many of them trying to sell back to you at wholesale later on. And he said, do they not see an inherent flaw in that logic? And there is an inherent flaw, and it is very true. The problem with Key Collector is it does create an intense demand. I guess it's the burden of success. It has been so successful. So many people rush in for the same number of books at the same time that you create a false demand that makes it seem like the book is far hotter than it is, when in reality, a couple of weeks later, unsold copies of that book began dropping in price because everyone who wanted it had to have it the first week. We have found time and again a book that was hot, not just through Key Collector, but through some of the other sites as well, because it's not the only source for this information, but they would list a book as hot. People would come in, they had to have it, they would buy it, and we would be struggling to meet the market. Reorder comes in 2 weeks later, nobody wants it because it's not hot this week on any of those apps. It is a flash in the pan thing. You know, most comic sales growth, it's an uphill growth. It gets more valuable over time. Hot books start at the top and they drop, most of them drop almost every day after that. And it's hard to get the speculator who isn't savvy about what he's doing to understand that. They think the app is making them a promise of success and fortune, and it's not. It's saying that at this point in time, there's tremendous interest in this. What makes it worse to me, and Key Collector is not guilty of this the way some sites are the sites that list a book as hot at the same time they're letting you know they've got 3,000 copies of a custom variant cover for that same book. This book is really hot. It's worth 3 times over cover, and we're selling these special covers for $20 and $25 each. So they do have a vested interest to manipulate that market. I have also talked with publishers who have assured me with absolute certainty that some of these sites, for a certain payment or for the creation of a custom variant at no charge or a very reduced charge, they get books recommended as hot books. This is not Key Collector I'm talking about, but there are other sites that go in. No, I find Nick at Key Collector, I really think he's one of the most reputable guys out there, but there are sites that will manipulate that market in exchange for payola. It's just like the old radio station game for a hit.
Cliff, your opinion means a lot. Jeremy, I love it. Keep selling, baby.
Make that money, Jeremy.
So Adam, so you heard some takes here. You heard some takes. I want to talk a little bit here about so my thinking on this is anything that gets more people into comic book stores and buying your books is tough to complain about.
Amen.
Now, I understand the idea that you have regular customers and you stock your shelves with them in mind and you want to make sure they're not sold out and they don't care about hot books.
Sure.
They want to read. But if that's true, then, one, you can pull the books for them. They can ask for it. They can be reserved, anything else. And second printings are forthcoming in this era, right? I mean, flipping is not a new phenomena by any stretch of the imagination, right? It goes all the way back, way back. I see stuff, guys, old comic book dealers talking about how they predicted that the death of Phoenix was going to be humongous, so they bought up case lots of it and things of that nature. So It's not a new phenomenon. I just say information flows faster in this era. So, Adam, what's your take on that?
So I have a couple things on that. I mean, we were just a moment ago talked about the Death in the Family. I've always read comics as a kid, and and so when I bought that book at Bob Wayne's old shop, by the way, it won't mean a lot of people watching this, but the people in the room will. At Bob Wayne's old shop, I bought it and then tried to sell it at Ron Killingsworth's shop at the time, because I was in Fort Worth, Texas. Jeremy knows all these people.
Dropping. You're dropping.
I know.
Deep
but I'm saying
names right there. Love it.
This is what I was into as a kid, was this idea that I could buy something for $3 and sell it for $10. And when I started recently, I was doing some workshop calls, just talking to retailers about a plan of a publisher. And we were talking about what does it take, what gets a Wednesday Warrior like most excited? And the answer that surprised me was how many stores that are like focused reader stores, like you would think just graphic novels only stores, who talked about how when the speculators are interested, the Wednesday Warriors become interested. Why? Because it justifies their purchase. Suddenly this $4 item that they were going to buy anyway, they feel better about buying it $10. But I think what you were keying me up to is something we talked about earlier, which is when we talk to comics retailers a lot, they're always looking for ways to get new people in the door. And as with anything, you ask 2,000 comics retailers a question, you're going to get 2,000 answers. But one of the most common is that we need big advertising. We need an advertising, association or something. Despite the fact that it's really hard to find any evidence that those ever work. What we know works is collecting. What we know works is the idea of getting, me as a kid in the store, is getting me jonesing on this idea that there's something I can flip. And not because I'm ever going to be able to. I was never able to sell that. I think I had that when I opened my shop, right? Or when I bought the shop and sold it then. It's this idea, though, that is addictive, that keeps you coming back, that sets, because then you can say to that customer who comes in and says, but I wanted 5. You can say, hey, if you pre-order, I'll give you 5 of anything. I'll pre-order 5 of anything you want. Right. So, and then you can get that person in as a subscriber. I think where retailers really get a friction on this is the fact that they don't see it coming. And so it creates friction in their daily lives. And that is a challenge. But again, that's the part of the challenge that all retailers are dealing with, which is this constant escalation of complexity that you have to deal with. The catalog just gets denser and more complex. Yeah. The way people are getting information is denser and more complex. That stuff you have to read and buy and know and process, and all of it is more complex. So to that end, I do think that the tools like the apps like Key Collector and like POS systems and all of those things are good ways for you to begin to limit the amount of information you personally have to process so that your organization can.
They're almost critical in this age of information overload.
Amen. Amen.
Cliff,
did you have a thought on that? I can tell.
Yeah, I did. Part of the problem that we've all had to adjust to because of Key Collector and apps and sites similar to that is that the old paradigms whereby we knew that if we sold 100% of number 1, we're going to sell 60% of number 2 and 40% of number 3 have fallen by the wayside, because if a number 1 is hot in Key Collector, unfortunately, the sales on number 2 are now often 20% of what number 1 sold. And that is where I've heard more than one retailer saying, because I wasn't quick enough to catch on to those shifts, Key Collector has cost me money, because while I ordered a lot of number 1 and sold it really well, I over-ordered so much on number 2 because my numbers had to be locked in right away that I lost everything I'd earned off number 1 and these excess copies of number 2. And in the case of bi-weekly books, very often we've ordered 2 and 3 before we've really gotten those figures. And
God forbid the weekly books. Yeah.
Right. And it's made it very tough for retailers. What I think Key Collector does very well, the same thing the Buyer's Guide used to do. It is an aggregated source of information, updated frequently about what has been optioned, what is going to television or to films. This is the sort of information that is vital, to me, more vital than a price recommendation, because some people they like to be ahead of the trend. They want to know what's going to be a movie and a TV show next year that I should be reading today. And I find Key Collector is useful to those customers. We, as a store, have subscribed to Key Collector from almost the beginning because it's useful to us. I can give recent updated information to my customers, so I know care for those things.
I knew I could get a sensible, reasonable take out of you on that, Cliff, because that just makes sense to me. That makes so much sense. And that if I were still a retailer, you better believe I would be checking that app and using that as my own intelligence tool.
It's going to save me going to 20 other sites to find the same information. He's done it for me.
Absolutely. And I have, and Adam, I want to float one thing. And if Nick, the programmer, the developer of this, is watching this, I want you on the show. I want to talk to you. I want to talk to you programmer to programmer as well as comics head to comics head. But let me say this.
Nick, the founder, is a pretty busy guy these days. This is part of why he hires me for this shit. Oh, can I say that? Yeah.
Hey, who's not, man? I got comics to read. Oh, dude, I got a lot of stuff to do in this pandemic. But let me say this. I want to ask you this. Would there be the possibility? Do they have a section? I have the app and I haven't had a chance to exhaustively go through it.
Sure.
What I was searching for is a section that says focus on the FOC. Like, here's what's on the FOC that's going to be hot. And call your retailer now and pre-reserve your copies of these books now. So that lets the retailer prepare for that. And lets them have stock for their customers, but also lets them satisfy the demand for these things. That's maybe not a perfect solution, but it's a possible wrinkle of something that could be added to the app that I would love to see.
Hey man, I'm hoping that Nick's not watching so that I can pitch that idea as my own. Focus on the FOC. I love it. I'm in, right? Yeah. Totally. Yeah. I would like to mention though, something that Cliff said earlier. That I think is really important to come back to, which is Nick, who's the founder of Key Collector, and the whole crew at Key Collector are really focused on comics and the comics culture and the comics, comics with a capital C, right? And even so much right now that a lot of the sections on the site are focusing on bringing attention to places where retailers, retailer support programs that are happening during the COVID-19 crisis, focusing on artists who are, you can purchase directly from those artists. They're using a lot of their traffic to focus on these ideas because they recognize that without these gentlemen, we're not, there is no Key Collector Comics is not a thing, right? We need these guys healthy and we need them strong. And they're really focusing a lot of attention on that right now. So, yeah.
That's great. Guy, I thought I knew the answer to this, and I'm really loving the variety of answers I'm hearing.
Yeah,
Cliff, did you have another
One
point?
thing I meant to say a while ago, because it was a question that came up on the screen while we were talking.
Oh, yeah.
That's it. That's the question. The answer to that question is definitely yes. If a book is sold out from the publisher and Key Collector has recommended it, I take a look at my sales of prior issues, looking in particular for customers we track by name, whether they pre-order or not, but just getting a general sale. I may end up pulling 50 or 60% of those books off the stands and holding them behind the counter to make sure that familiar faces get offered the book. If by the weekend we still have some left, they go back out on the shelves. But I am not going to let my regulars who want to read the next issue of a storyline miss out in order to pursue the short sale to a guy who isn't going to come back for the issue after that.
Yeah, who you'll never see again. Yeah.
That's right. The loyalty is the guys who are in there every time.
Data and knowing your customer base, most importantly.
That is exactly
That's not a no-risk thing to do. Jeremy, tell me about that. What's your policy on preemptive pulling for your customers? Do they have to opt into that kind of thing? Do you do it by default because just you've been doing this a long time,
I do it by default, and pretty much the way I tell my regulars is if there's a comic in your file and you go, well, what's this? I'll tell you why I gave it to you, and if you don't want it, give it back. No harm, no foul, and we'll put it back out on the rack and let somebody else buy it. And I'd say in that regard, on the ones that I choose to take that method with, I'm in the high 90s percentile wise.
Yeah,
pretty much my customers. Got to remember, I've been doing this a long time. Not as long as Cliff, but I've been doing it a long time. if I hand a comic to my customers and say this is pertinent to the other things you're reading, they'll go, okay, let's get it, that kind of thing, and very little resistance.
Well, can I just say, fellas, because we did this at my shop. The guy who asked that question, J.K. McGill, my personal comics Svengali and mentor, used to do it. Without him doing that, I wouldn't be the comic obsessed dork that I am today.
Whoa, there we go.
But I will say this. That is the kind of service, like, where else are you going to get that? Where a retailer is going to, because he knows his customer, he's willing to take a risk on product that he cannot return and make a recommendation risk-free to a customer. This is the kind of thing that a comic book shop can do and does do that online retailing is never going to do. And that is why we got to support, in this moment, we got to support the shops. It's so much more important than ever. Honestly, man, there's not too many things that are as important to me as comic shop culture. So I appreciate everything that you guys do. Like, it literally shaped my life from the age of 10 for the last 35 years of my life. So the things you guys do are super important to your communities, right? And it's not seen on the macro level. It's at the micro level. It's where the rubber meets the road. It's those kids that grew up reading comics and became creators or became whatever because they had like a positive thing to channel their energies and their time and their money and their focus into. So, because I want to thank everybody who's participated in this. And I want to go in our last segment. I want to go to predictions, and I'm going to, we like to do this. So please, let's prognosticate for a second.
Okay.
Let's talk about how's this key collector thing going to play out, digital sales and everything. I came into this with an opinion that maybe there was something a little sleazy and shady going on under the surface behind the scenes. And now I feel, from what Cliff has told me and from what I'm hearing from Adam, who are two guys that I trust a lot and who have intimate knowledge of this, I feel like this is just the modern Overstreet. This is a new way. This is a crowdsourced Overstreet. And there is certainly room. I think that combined with a dealer-fed Overstreet, like the two of those combined, are a powerful price discovery mechanism that retailers should be taking, and a customer excitement generator that retailers should be considering how they can take advantage of, not how they can fight it and fight the flippers. Any final thoughts on that and predictions? Let's start with Mike Hansen. Give me a prediction, buddy.
Well, I think that you're absolutely right that this isn't going away, that this is the world we're in now. And if there is an app that has a lot of comprehensive information that is useful to both collectors and retailers, that's something that is more valuable than ever now, because there's just going to be more and more information coming into these databases every month. So something that is a useful filter is great. I'd be curious, the other retailers, if you see these people who come in, the people who are the flippers, who have Threat or Menace, nice. If they're people you're never going to see again, or if you're going to see them just grabbing a different issue of a different series every single week. That's exactly
that's the one.
It's unpredictable. It's unpredictable behavior, but on the other hand, you're selling out. So the issue seems like it's more of a matter of logistics and distribution to be able to fill all of the orders that you want to fill and fill all the demand you want to fill without it messing with your trends too badly as far as future ordering goes. So my prediction is it's sticking around, and it's going to be ultimately it's what you use it for. So I think that it can be used for a lot of good and help people more than it could hurt. But Dan, getting back to something you said earlier, also, this is something that has been going on forever. Yes. You hear about like Conan #3 or Howard the Duck #1, and the speculation that the returnable channels were hoarding those and then lying about the stripped returns so they could resell them years later.
Another good point.
But like when I was in high school, the Death of Superman Day, that it was, I don't remember if it was a Thursday or Friday at that point in '92, whatever New Comic Shop Day was. And I wish we'd get back to Friday.
I bet Cliff knows.
It was
Well, and
still
here's
legit.
here's what I think. I remember that day, and that was a day though that retailers were prepared to take advantage of the collector mentality,
Right.
and they were able to
Months in
prepare
advance
in
now.
the right way, and all the stars aligned, and it happened in a way that probably won't happen again in that way soon. But it happened again with Obama, Spider-Man, et cetera, and a couple of other things. So you never know. I think anything that gets people into your store and gives them a chance to see that you got the best comic store in town that stocks a lot of comics is going to be huge.
This means something.
So let's go to Cliff for his prediction.
I do predict, because of what I have mentioned before, that there are some of those sites similar to Key Collector that manipulate the market for money. I predict that at some point, some disgruntled publisher is going to spill the beans on that and go forward with details of how much he paid for a book to be promoted as a hot book, how many free copies he had to give to make it happen, that sort of thing. And when that happens, I think a number of these sites are going to go away, because there are a number of them that are not scrupulous in the way that Key Collector is. And I think there will be a real blowback on that when people realize they have been lied to so that the guy running the site can make some money, not Key Collector.
Great point. And then the winner is the one who is perceived as the most honest and
Right.
not manipulating the market. So they got a shot at it from what I'm hearing.
Yep.
Jeremy,
That's exactly it.
you got any predictions for us?
Well, I think that this is, at least historically, looking at all kinds of markets that have this kind of action going on in them. At some point, people get tired of spending money on nothing, or what turns out to be nothing. They spent $20 on a comic that they thought they could sell for 30, and selling for 10. And you only do that so many times. At least the people on this screen only do that so many times before they're like, I ain't doing that no more. Now, I can't speak effectively for the rest of the world, but I think that it's pretty clear that you burn yourself too many times doing that way, and you're not doing it anymore. So if as you pointed out, that if you're following scrupulous information and scrupulous recommendations, you're much more likely to end up with good results. Now, see, I at the risk of taking this on a slightly different tack that may be a different conversation. See, my feeling is the variant market in general is so completely deeply in the midst of that.
Yes, it is.
Artificial inflation for the point of artificial inflation. I see time after time after time a book that comes out that's a 1 in whatever, doesn't matter whether it's a 1 in 10 or a 1 in 100, that week is the hottest thing in the world and is selling for $50, $60, $80, $100 on eBay, that 2 weeks later it's an $8 book.
Yes.
Jeremy, you know why that is such a great point, and it's also a great idea for a future live stream, buddy. So I'm thinking next Tuesday, let's talk variant covers a lot, because there's a lot to talk about on that topic.
That's a crazy topic, but I feel it's very similar in that regard. That the people,
it is absolutely,
and I think that,
I think it's 5 years ahead. Basically, it's starting to collapse now, the same way that the investments sites may collapse if they don't play fair with their customers, because variants haven't played fair with their customers, and now customers are realizing, I've spent a lot of money on worthless paper.
Yep.
Okay. Adam, please predict something for me.
Oh, I can't wait for this. He put his hand on his head. We know it.
I know. I'm looking for a punchline from Great Kreskin. I am going to predict. So we are about to enter a time of change in our industry. There's no question. Everyone knows that we're going to be moving to some shift in the way we do business, and it will likely mean fewer stores. At least in the short term. It will likely mean fewer publishers, at least in the short term. I think you guys are more likely than anything. If I really want to make a prediction, I think in the short term, you're going to get your wish, because I think that there's a very likely scenario where distribution means the limits of distribution are going to mean that we have to lower the SKU counts, which means lowering variance.
We're seeing that. We're seeing that happening right now already, right? Marvel's already announced line-wide cuts.
Exactly. And are they likely to cut? What are they most likely to cut? Right? They've already spent the A&E on the book's interiors. They're going to cut that book. They're more likely to cut the SKU, right? So I think we're going to see that, but more in a broader, coming together kind of way. I think one of the things that I hear from Jeremy and Cliff right now and Mike is the same thing that really holds up as to why Key Collector is important and why they are important, which is that the stores that treat the businesses, all of the vendors in this entire little web of community we're in, you treat people with integrity, when you have good systems for processing data, when you are good at handling complex problems and breaking them down into simpler solutions, you're going to be more likely to succeed. You're going to be more likely to survive what's next. And I think that what we're seeing is 2-3 gentlemen here, they're showing exactly what it's going to take to survive what's next, which is integrity and the ability to handle complexity and the data that's coming in. And I cannot stress enough, Cliff down here telling us that he's been a paying member of Key Collector since the beginning. Why? Pretty smart guy.
I became a paid member, but just to research, I went month to month. I didn't sign up for the year yet. But here's my prediction, guys.
Sure.
So there is a humongous overlap, and we've talked about this a little bit before, between collectors and readers, right? There are very few people that collect and sell and flip comics that don't inherently enjoy comics on some level,
right? Or
will possibly enjoy them more. Like their entry to the hobby might be from a speculative angle. I came into comics in the 80s and 90s when there was a big boom in that, and a ton of people got into it. And most of them cashed out and didn't care about comics and, never saw them again. But man, a portion of those kids got really into the comics and otherwise wouldn't have. And we wouldn't have the industry we have today. So my prediction is this, that somewhere there is a kid using this Key Collector app and trying to flip books on eBay that's going to discover a comic, and it's going to discover the joy of the medium of reading comics, and is either going to go on to run a comic book store if those things even exist in the future, or maybe we'll be a creator and sell directly to fans in whatever the new paradigm is for selling comics. But I don't know. But I'm coming away from this feeling very positive about the Key Collector app. I know this is not going to be a popular opinion among a lot of retailers that I know. Brian Hibbs, I'm looking at you.
Hi, Brian.
Hey, Brian.
Speaking of Brian Hibbs, Brian is going to be on the show this Thursday, along with fellow loudmouth retailer Phil Boyle. Two guys who
are going to be able to get a word in edgewise here, Dan.
Well, these are
anybody with opinions to talk. I mean,
I say loudmouth television. I say loudmouth in a respectful way because they're both outspoken and have done and said a lot for the industry. People listen to and respect them, but they also come at the industry from really divergent angles, right? They both run a different type of chain of comic book stores on different coasts. So I'm super looking forward to that. But I'm also going to tease right now, next Tuesday, if you guys are down, any of you guys are down, you're invited back. And let's talk about variant comics and variant covers and the problems around that. I like the earlier time as well. Maybe we'll try something around this time. Anyway, thank you guys for joining us. And hey, thank you, YouTube and Facebook and America and the world at large and the internet, for watching Comic Book News and watching this live stream. This is more fun than anything I have ever done on the internet before, and that includes pornography. So thank you, America. We will see you